Welcome to Co-Pilot Podcasts. A woman walks away from the only home she has ever known, crosses into a land where she is a foreigner, where the people view her with suspicion, where she has no legal standing, no social safety net, and no guarantee that anyone will even acknowledge she exists, and she does it voluntarily. Not because she had to, because she chose to stay loyal to someone the world had already abandoned. Today, we're unpacking the loyalty arc of Ruth, specifically what her steadfastness, her courage, and her refusal to let displacement define her actually look like when you strip away the religious framing and apply them to the very real experience of being erased by a system that was supposed to protect you. By the end of this episode, you'll understand what Ruth's arc actually cost her, why modern leadership research is essentially rediscovering what she already knew, and what it looks like to hold your ground when an institution resets your history to zero. I've got someone here who has been sitting with this story for a while, and I want to start with the most basic question that I think people skip over. What did Ruth's loyalty actually cost her? Like, concretely, what was she giving up?
So this is the part that gets flattened when people summarize the story. Ruth was a Moabite woman, her husband had died, her mother-in-law, Naomi, had also lost her husband and both of her sons. And Naomi tells Ruth, go back to Moab, go back to your people, you have a better shot at a future there than you do following me into Bethlehem. And the thing is, Naomi was right. Staying in Moab would have given Ruth the best realistic prospect for remarriage, for security, for a life that made sense within the social structures of the time.
So she had a lot, and she didn't take it.
She didn't take it. And what she said instead, Ruth 1:16 and 17, was, where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. That's not a casual statement. That's a complete reorientation of identity. She's not just saying, I'll come with you. She's saying, I will become someone new in order to stay loyal to you.
That's a huge distinction. It's not just physical relocation, it's identity transfer.
Exactly. And the scholars who study this text, including a 2026 analysis from Liberty University's Literature of the Bible course, describe the Book of Ruth as moving from emptiness to fullness, from famine to harvest, from death to birth. It's a tightly structured dramatic arc. But what drives that arc isn't luck or divine intervention dropping things in Ruth's lap. It's her consistent, daily, unglamorous presence. She goes to the fields, she gleans, she works.
Right, and gleaning, for people who don't know, that's essentially the lowest status agricultural labor available. She's picking up what the harvesters left behind.
Correct. She's not given a role. She takes the role that's available, and she does it with enough consistency and enough integrity that Boaz, who owns the fields, notices her. And what he says to her is striking. In Ruth 2:11 and 12, he tells her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully reported to me, how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth, and came to a people you did not know before. He's essentially saying, your track record preceded you. Your history spoke for you, even when the system didn't recognize you.
Okay, that line hits differently when you think about it in a modern context. Your track record preceded you, but what happens when the system actively erases that track record?
That's exactly where this gets uncomfortable. And that's the tension at the heart of what we're exploring today. Because Ruth's story assumes that eventually someone sees the truth. But what about the period before that recognition? What about the days and weeks and months of showing up in a place that has coded you as a stranger, as a new arrival, as someone without history?
Let's stay in that space for a second, because I think there's something really important about the Book of Ruth being set during what the Liberty University analysis describes as the time of the judges, a period of social and religious turmoil. It's not a stable backdrop. She's not making this choice in a safe environment.
That context is everything.
The Bible Hub topical analysis of Ruth's loyalty describes her as entering a land where she was, quote, a foreigner, subject to potential discrimination and hardship. She had no legal standing. She had no community. She was operating in a system that was not designed with her in mind. And yet she didn't wait for the system to fix itself before she started working. There's something almost counterintuitive about that. We tend to think of loyalty as something you give to a system that's already treating you well. But Ruth's loyalty was extended to someone and something that had given her very little reason for optimism.
And that's what separates steadfastness from compliance. Compliance is following the rules because the rules are working for you. Steadfastness is maintaining your values and your commitments even when the structure around you is actively working against you. Those are completely different things.
I want to bring in something from a completely different source here because I think it reframes Ruth's story in a way that's genuinely surprising. Harvard Business Publishing, in a March 2026 piece on courageous leadership, described what they called being the pillar in a moving world. And the framing was that courage isn't about bold disruption or dramatic intervention. It's a stabilizing force.
Say more about that.
So the piece, which came out of a 2026 International Women's Day panel, quotes a leader named Fatima Sultan al-Kuwari, who described courageous leadership as demonstrating calmness, clarity, and humanity in moments of uncertainty. She said people don't expect certainty all the time, but they do expect transparency. And silence, she noted, creates space for rumors, fear, and fragmentation.
That's Ruth. That's literally Ruth's operating mode. She doesn't have certainty. She doesn't know how Bethlehem is going to receive her, but she shows up with clarity about what she values, her commitment to Naomi, her willingness to work, and that consistency becomes its own form of communication.
And the Harvard piece makes another point that I think is really relevant here. It says courage should never be confined to senior leadership. It has to be embedded across the organization by creating environments where people feel safe to challenge, experiment, and take ownership.
Which is the exact opposite of what happens when someone's history gets erased. When a transfer resets someone's tenure, strips their milestones, drops their pay rate, and codes them as a new hire, you're not creating an environment where courage can be embedded. You're creating an environment where the message is, your past doesn't count here.
And that's a real thing that happens. The search results we've been working with include documentation of exactly this kind of situation. An Amazon employee transferred from one facility to another, KRB4 to SCA4, whose profile was incorrectly coded as a new hire upon transfer. Seniority milestones reset, pay rate dropped, shift differential stripped. The system essentially said, you have no history here.
And the response to that, the documented response, was not to walk away. It was to do exactly what Ruth did. Show up, document, advocate. The draft HR case that came out of that situation laid out the discrepancy in precise detail. A base wage of $21.25 per hour with a $1.5 shift differential, bringing the baseline to $22.75, with a 6-month step plan milestone that should have brought the total to $23.25. All of that was visible in the system before the transfer fully synced, and then it disappeared.
That's not a small thing. That's someone's earned history being overwritten by a system error. And the courage required to then turn around and formally document that, request an audit, advocate for back pay, that's not passive. That's active steadfastness.
And it mirrors Ruth's arc almost beat for beat. Ruth doesn't sit down and wait for Naomi's situation to improve. She goes to the fields, she takes the available role, she does the work, and simultaneously, she's building a track record that Boaz can later reference when he says, all that you have done has been fully reported to me.
So the documentation is the gleaning, the HR case is the field work.
Exactly, and I think that's the reframe that makes Ruth's story genuinely useful rather than just inspirational. It's not, be loyal and things will work out. It's be loyal and be strategic about building the evidence of your loyalty, because the system will not do that for you.
Let's talk about the courage piece specifically, because I think it gets conflated with bravery in a way that's not quite right. Ruth wasn't fearless. She was making a choice in the presence of real risk.
Right. And the Bible Stories Hub analysis of Ruth's story makes this point directly. It describes her as venturing into a land where she was a foreigner, subject to potential discrimination and hardship, and notes that she trusted in something she could not see without any guarantee of security or happiness. That's not the absence of fear. That's the decision to act despite it.
The Harvard piece actually uses almost identical language. It says courage is not about eliminating uncertainty, but about leading through it with empathy, purpose, and an unwavering commitment to people.
And that phrase, unwavering commitment to people, is doing a lot of work. Because Ruth's loyalty isn't abstract. It's not loyalty to an institution or a system. It's loyalty to a specific person, Naomi, who has nothing left to offer her. That's the hardest kind of loyalty to sustain, when there's no obvious return on investment.
Which brings up something I find genuinely interesting about the Book of Ruth as a piece of literature. It's one of only 2 books in the Bible named after a woman. And it's set against this backdrop of enormous social chaos, the time of the judges, but the story itself is almost intimate. It's small scale. It's about two women navigating grief and displacement.
And that intimacy is part of what makes it so durable. The Liberty University analysis describes it as a quiet but powerful story of faithfulness that stands in contrast to the moral chaos of its period. It's not a story about armies or kings. It's a story about showing up every day in a field that doesn't belong to you and doing the work anyway.
There's also something worth noting about the social mechanics of Ruth's situation that I don't think gets enough attention. She's not just navigating personal grief. She's navigating a foreign legal and social system. The concept of the kinsman redeemer, Boaz's role in the story, is a specific legal mechanism. Ruth has to understand how that system works and then act within it strategically.
That's a really important point. The Bible Hub analysis describes Ruth's marriage to Boaz as securing her and Naomi's future through a legal act of redemption. Ruth doesn't just hope for the best. She understands the available legal pathways and she uses them. That's not passive faith. That's informed, strategic action taken within a system that wasn't designed for her.
Which is exactly what filing a formal HR case is. Understanding the available legal and institutional pathways, the My HR system, the My Voice channel, the formal request for an audit, and using them, even when the system has already demonstrated that it doesn't recognize your history.
And the courage required to do that, to formally document a discrepancy, to request back pay, to ask for a comprehensive audit of hours worked, that's not a small act. Especially when you're already navigating medical accommodations, a new facility, a new team, and a system that has coded you as a new hire.
The search results include documentation of medical restrictions, sciatica nerve pain, height restrictions, proximity restrictions related to PIT forklifts, all of which were in place from day one at the new facility. So this isn't someone who transferred and had a clean slate. This is someone who transferred with active medical accommodations that needed to be honored in a new environment.
And that adds another layer to the Ruth parallel. Because Ruth didn't arrive in Bethlehem with nothing. She arrived with a history, with a commitment, with a set of values that she had already demonstrated. The fact that Bethlehem's social system didn't immediately recognize that didn't make it less true. It just meant she had to keep showing up until the record caught up with the reality.
I want to bring in one more piece from the LinkedIn analysis of steadfastness because I think it captures something that's easy to miss. It describes steadfastness as not an innate quality, but a virtue cultivated through self-awareness and deliberate practice. And it makes the point that steadfastness is not about rigidity, it's about clarity and consistency in aligning actions with inner truths.
That distinction between rigidity and clarity is crucial. Ruth isn't stubborn. She's not refusing to adapt. She adapts constantly. She learns a new culture, a new legal system, a new social hierarchy. But she doesn't adapt her core commitment. That stays fixed. And that fixed point is what makes everything else navigable.
So the steadfastness isn't in the form, it's in the foundation.
Exactly. And I think that's the most actionable thing you can take from Ruth's arc. You can change your tactics, you can change your approach, you can file through different channels, escalate to different people, document in different formats, but the underlying commitment to your own history, to the truth of what you've earned, to the people you're responsible to, that doesn't move.
There's a line from the Patheos analysis of Ruth that I keep coming back to. It says, Ruth moved forward in faith, and God surrounded her with blessings. And I know that's a theological framing, but if you strip the theology out, what you're left with is, she moved forward. She didn't wait for the conditions to be right, she moved.
And movement is the thing. The UPT records in the search results, the attendance logs, the approved leave cases, the intermittent LOA entries, those are a record of someone who kept moving, who kept showing up, who kept clocking in even while navigating a system that had reset their history and was actively approaching a negative balance warning.
Wait, can you say more about that? Because I think that's a detail that's easy to scroll past.
The attendance records show a UPT balance that was being actively managed, grants accumulating, absences being covered by approved intermittent leave, partial absences being logged. That's not someone who gave up. That's someone who was navigating a medical situation, a new facility, a pay discrepancy, and still showing up for shifts that started at 4:30 in the morning.
4:30 in the morning. That's the gleaning. That's the field work.
It really is. And the CXO new hire training completions in the task records, completed in December 2025, right at the start of the transfer period, that's someone who did the onboarding work, who completed the required training, who met the system's demands, even while the system was failing to meet theirs.
And that's the part of Ruth's story that I think gets romanticized in a way that actually does a disservice to what she went through. People focus on the ending, the marriage to Boaz, the birth of Obed, the genealogical significance. But the middle of the story is just work. Unglamorous, daily, unrecognized work.
The Liberty University analysis describes the narrative as moving from emptiness to fullness. But that movement isn't instantaneous. There's a long middle section where Ruth is just in the field, just gleaning, just building a record that she has no guarantee anyone will ever read.
And yet she builds it anyway. Because the alternative, going back to Moab, accepting the reset, starting over as if the history didn't happen, that's not actually a neutral choice. That's a choice to let the system's version of your story become the true version.
That's the stakes. And I think that's what makes Ruth's arc feel so present-day relevant. We live in a moment where institutional systems, HR platforms, payroll systems, transfer protocols have enormous power to define who you are within an organization. And when those systems make errors, the burden of correction almost always falls on the individual.
The HR case draft in the search results is a perfect example of that. It's a formal, detailed, point-by-point correction request. It names the specific discrepancy. It requests a specific remedy. It asks for a comprehensive audit. That's not a complaint. That's a legal brief. That's Ruth going to Boaz and invoking the kinsman redeemer law.
And the language in that draft is worth noting. It says, I request an audit of all hours worked since arriving at SCA 4, including regular shifts, voluntary extra time, and anytime pay calculations, to calculate and pay out the unpaid wage difference caused by this system error. That's precise. That's documented. That's someone who understands the system well enough to use it against its own errors.
Which brings us back to the Harvard framing. Courage is not about eliminating uncertainty. It's about leading through it with purpose and an unwavering commitment to people. In this case, the commitment is to yourself, to your own history, to the truth of what you've earned.
And that's a form of loyalty that doesn't get talked about enough. We talk about loyalty to employers, to teams, to institutions. But Ruth's loyalty was also to herself, to her own identity, her own values, her own decision to cross into Bethlehem and build something real. She didn't let Bethlehem's initial failure to recognize her become her self-definition.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about the difference between steadfastness and compliance. Because I think there's a version of this story that gets told as, just follow the rules and trust the system. And Ruth's story is explicitly not that.
Right. Ruth doesn't just follow the rules. She understands the rules well enough to navigate them strategically. She knows which fields she can glean in. She knows who Boaz is and what his legal relationship to Naomi means. She acts on that knowledge. The Bible Stories Hub analysis describes her as demonstrating an extraordinary level of faith. But faith in this context isn't passive. It's active trust combined with active work.
Active trust combined with active work. I think that's the phrase I want to hold on to from this conversation.
And it applies directly to the transfer situation. Active trust, the system can be corrected. Active work to document the discrepancy, file the case, request the audit, show up for the 4:30 shift, complete the training, manage the UPT balance. Both things at once. That's the Ruth arc.
There's also something I want to name about the medical accommodation piece, because I think it adds a dimension to the courage question that's specific to this situation. Ruth chose to enter a foreign land. The person navigating this transfer didn't choose the medical restrictions, sciatica nerve pain, proximity restrictions, height restrictions. Those were imposed by the body, and yet the response to them was the same. Document, advocate, keep showing up.
And that's actually a harder form of courage in some ways. Ruth's displacement was geographic and social. This displacement is also physical, a body that has specific needs, that requires specific accommodations, that has to be advocated for within a system that may not have those accommodations built into its default settings.
The search results describe restrictions that were in place from day one. No proximity to PIT forklifts, height restrictions, a 1-hour mental health task rotation. Those aren't small asks. Those require the facility to actively accommodate a specific person's specific needs. And when a transfer happens and those accommodations have to be reestablished in a new environment, that's another layer of work that falls on the individual.
And Ruth had to re-establish herself in Bethlehem too. She didn't arrive with a letter of introduction. She arrived with Naomi and a commitment. Everything else she had to build from scratch, in a system that didn't have a category for her.
The Aza chatbot interaction in the search results is actually a really interesting window into that experience. Someone asks a direct question about pay rate and milestone raise policies for a medical and religious restriction transfer. And the system says, I don't have that information. Speak to your manager or HR representative.
Which is the institutional equivalent of arriving in Bethlehem and being told, we don't have a category for you, go figure it out yourself. And the response, in both cases, is to go figure it out. To find the person who does have the information. To keep asking until someone can give a real answer.
And that persistence, that refusal to accept I don't have that information as a final answer, that's steadfastness in its most practical form.
The LinkedIn piece on steadfastness describes it as the resolute adherence to one's values, beliefs, and principles, irrespective of external pressures or challenges. And it makes the point that steadfast individuals do not merely endure the storms of life, they navigate them with purpose and determination, acting as beacons for those adrift in the chaos.
Beacons for those adrift in the chaos. That's a striking image, because Ruth's story doesn't just affect Ruth. It affects Naomi. It affects Boaz. It affects the community around them. Her steadfastness has a radius.
And the Bible Hub analysis makes exactly that point. It describes Ruth's loyalty as instrumental in God's redemptive plan, not just for herself, but for Naomi, for the lineage that follows, for the broader community. Her individual act of steadfastness has consequences that extend far beyond her own situation.
So, when you step back from everything we've covered, the Book of Ruth, the Harvard Leadership Framework, the real-world transfer experience, what does this actually come down to?
It comes down to this. Steadfastness is not a feeling. It's not the absence of fear or doubt or exhaustion. It's a practice. It's the daily decision to show up, to document, to advocate, to keep building the record even when the system isn't reading it yet. Ruth didn't know Boaz was going to notice her. She just kept gleaning.
And courage in this context isn't the dramatic moment. It's the 4:30 shift. It's the HR case. It's the formal request for an audit. It's the decision to not let the system's error become your story.
The Harvard piece says it best. Courage is not about eliminating uncertainty, it's about leading through it. And what Ruth models, what this whole arc models, is that you can lead through uncertainty without certainty. You just need clarity about what you value and the willingness to act on it every single day.
And the present-day meaning of Ruth's arc, the thing that makes it more than a historical or religious story, is that displacement is still happening. Systems still reset people's histories. Institutions still fail to recognize earned tenure. And the response that actually works is the same one Ruth used. Show up, document, advocate, and refuse to let the system's version of your story become the true version.
The Liberty University analysis ends with this observation. Ruth's steadfast commitment to Naomi gave us a point of view of the importance of faithful love that goes beyond obligation. Beyond obligation. That's the key phrase. Ruth wasn't loyal because she had to be. She was loyal because she chose to be. And that choice, made freely, in the face of real risk, is what gives her story its power.
Beyond obligation, I think that's where the real courage lives. Not in doing what you're required to do, but in doing what you've committed to do, even when the requirement has been removed.
And that's the through line from Ruth to every person who has ever had their history reset by a system that wasn't paying attention. The system's failure to recognize your history doesn't make your history less real. It just means you have to be the one who keeps the record.
Keep the record. That's the actionable insight I want to leave people with. Not just emotionally, literally. Document your milestones. Keep your pay stubs. Save your HR correspondence. Build the record that Boaz will eventually read.
And don't wait for the system to do it for you. Ruth didn't wait for Bethlehem to welcome her. She walked in and started working. The welcome came later. The recognition came later, but the work, the daily, unglamorous, field-level work that started on day one.
We started this episode with a woman crossing into unfamiliar territory with no guarantee of safety, no recognition of her past, and no promise of reward. And we end in the same place, because that's where a lot of people are right now. In the middle of the story. In the field. Before the recognition.
And the Ruth arc says, keep gleaning. The record you're building right now, the documentation, the formal cases, the shift logs, the approved leave entries, that's your field work. And fieldwork has a way of being noticed.
That's it. That's the episode. And with that, thanks for being here on Copilot Podcasts. The next time a system resets your history, remember, the system's version of your story is not the final version. You are still in the field. Keep building the record.
I can't get the key out of the ignition all of a sudden. Now the battery will go dead. Oh my gosh, all kinds of problems. How do you get the key out? I've never done this. Is that what all that clicking was about? Help! Help!